Namaste, and I welcome to you this episode 7 of the Sitaram Goel Centenary Series. And before I start, I had to make a few announcements. This series is sponsored by Sudarshan and Veena. And also, today, we have a sponsor who will award all good questions. And of course, what is a good question? That I will decide. So those good questions will be rewarded with one of Sitaram Goelji's books, How I Became a Hindu. So if you're interested in winning that book, then please ask a good question and be ready for it. And you have some time to prepare for a good question. And as usual, I welcome again. हम स्वागत करते हैं शंकर शरण जी का. आज इनका इंटरनेट ठीक है तो वापस जुड़ गए. And I welcome Koenraad Elst. And today we have a very famous book. Of course, I will start with Shankar Sharan जी today, क्योंकि ये पिछली बार थे नहीं, तो आज आपसे मैं आरंभ करूंगा. शंकर शरण जी, तो ये पुस्तक जो है वस्तुतः एक टीका है. इसको कह सकते हैं कि ये एक टीका है. राम गोपाल मिश्र जी की पुस्तक थी उसके ऊपर, हीरोइक हिंदू रेजिस्टेंस टू मुस्लिम इन्वेडर्स. और एक ये इतिहास का एक छुपा हुआ एक पन्ना उजागर करती है. हमें हमेशा यही पढ़ाया गया, सदैव यही बताया गया कि हम तो हारते ही रहे हैं, हम तो हारते ही रहे हैं. वी हैव ऑलवेज बीन डिफीटेड, वी नेवर वन एनीथिंग. ये 500 वर्ष का एक कार्य का एक काल है, लगभग मोहम्मद बिन कासिम से पहले से, बल्कि क्योंकि मोहम्मद बिन कासिम के पहले 70 साल पहले से हमले हो रहे थे. और 7वीं शताब्दी से लेके और 12वीं शताब्दी के अंत तक का इतिहास है. शंकर शरण जी,
पहले तो इस पर ध्यान दिलाना चाहता हूँ कि सीताराम गोयल जी की बड़ी इच्छा थी कि वो भारत का इतिहास व्यवस्थित रूप से लिखने का भी काम करते. जैसा कोनराड उनके लिए बोलते भी हैं हिस्टोरियन. सीताराम गोयल जी हिस्टोरियन थे, लेकिन उन्होंने जैसी इतिहास पुस्तक वो चाहते थे वैसा वो लिख नहीं पाए. फिर भी उनकी कई किताबों में इस बात का उल्लेख है और इसकी चिंता है. वो भारतीय इतिहास लेखन और जो भारत में इतिहास पढ़ाया जा रहा है और भारत में राजनीतिक विमर्श में जो इतिहास के बारे में धारणा है, इस पर वो बहुत गहराई से चिंतित थे. और मैं सबसे पहले मैं इसका ध्यान दिलाना चाहता हूँ कि गोयल जी एक बड़ी गंभीर बात कहते हैं. वो कहते हैं कि बहुत समय से, लंबे समय से भारत के हिंदुओं ने, क्योंकि भारत के हिंदुओं का मतलब हिंदुओं ने, उन्होंने अपने आध्यात्मिक केंद्र की चेतना खो दी है. और जिसको कोनराड ने भी अपनी एक आर्गुमेंटेटिव हिंदू में लिखा है आखिरी अध्याय में, कि अब वो वातावरण नहीं रहा जो सदियों से भारत में था, कि हिंदू धर्म की चेतना हवा में रहती थी. उनके पौराणिक कथाएं, उनका सिद्धांत और हमारी जो धर्म निष्ठा और धर्म के जो मूल तत्व हैं, ये पहले बिना पढ़े लोगों को प्राप्त हो जाते थे. अब ये कई पीढ़ियों से ये खत्म हो चुका है. और इसी के साथ सीताराम गोयल जी जोड़ते हैं कि अब हिंदू चेतना का जो एकमात्र स्रोत बचा है वह यही हिंदू एकता का इतिहास, हिंदू इतिहास, और खास करके ये जो इस्लामी साम्राज्यवाद के विरुद्ध जो सदियों से हिंदुओं ने लड़ाई लड़ी, अब यही भारत के हिंदुओं को एक करने वाली चेतना बच गई है. और यही कारण है कि जो हिंदू समाज के शत्रु हैं वो ठीक इतिहास को विकृत करने पर वो बहुत ही जोर दे रहे हैं और काफ़ी वो सफल हुए हैं. और आज की स्थिति को देख कर तो ये लगता है कि वो दिन दूनी रात चौगनी उनको सफलता मिल रही है. और यही इसका मैं महसूस करता हूँ कि ये इसका संदर्भ है इस पुस्तक का. और जो इस तरह की पुस्तकें सीताराम गोयल जी ने लिखी, जैसे स्टोरी ऑफ इस्लामिक इंपीरियलिज्म इन इंडिया, या फिर हिस्ट्री ऑफ पॉलिटिकल परवर्सन ऑफ पॉलिटिकल पार्लांस, नेहरूइज्म, फिर वो हिंदू टेम्पल्स, हर एक में सीताराम गोयल जी इस बात पर ध्यान दिलाते हैं कि ये जो हिंदुओं की इतिहास चेतना को सिस्टमेटिक रूप से विकृत किया गया है, ये सबसे भयंकर बात है आज. क्योंकि अब शास्त्रों की शिक्षा नहीं होती जो पहले होती थी. अब घर घर में रामचरितमानस पढ़ने वाली और जानने वाली संस्कृति चेतना हिंदुओं में तेजी से घट रही है। बल्कि हाल तो यह है कि अब उनकी भाषा ही उनसे छिन रही है। वो बंगाल से लेकर तमिलनाडु तक अब उनके पास अपनी भाषा खत्म हो रही है। अंग्रेजी धीरे धीरे उस क्षेत्र में भी घुस रही है जहाँ पहले कभी नहीं थी। तो इसके कारण उनके जो पारंपरिक ज्ञान शास्त्र है और वो संयुक्त परिवार की जो परंपरा थी वो खत्म हो रही है। तो किसी रूप में अब उनके पास ऑटोमेटिक हिंदू चेतना की गुंजाइश नहीं बच गई है। और इसीलिए ये जो विकृतीकरण है इस पर वो बहुत ही चिंता करते हैं सीताराम गोयल जी। और जैसा मैंने कहा कि कई पुस्तकों में उन्होंने संक्षेप में इसका ध्यान दिलाया है। और ये भी एक दुर्भाग्य की बात है कि ये इतिहास को विकृत करना, जिसका इसमें ये जो पुस्तक है आज जिसकी हम चर्चा कर रहे हैं वो उसके एक या दो पहलू पर उसकी चर्चा करता है। लेकिन ये विकृतीकरण 100 साल पहले शुरू हुआ हमारे यहाँ सिस्टमेटिक रूप से, और दुर्भाग्य से हमारे स्वतंत्रता आंदोलन के नेताओं ने इसको एक तरह से स्थापित किया। जो इतिहास ब्रिटिश काल में सीमित या अपूर्ण जैसा जाने अनजाने लिखा गया, वन साइडेड जैसा, वो और भी बुरा हो गया, बल्कि जानबूझ के उसको बिगाड़ा गया। और यही सबसे महत्वपूर्ण बात है जो यहाँ पर भी इसमें भी सीताराम गोयल ने शुरू में ही इसका उल्लेख किया है कि हिंदू समाज अपने सदियों के अनुभव से इस्लामी मतवाद को जो ठीक ठीक जानता था, उसके व्यवहार को ठीक ठीक जानता था, उसको स्वयं भारतीय स्वाधीनता आंदोलन के नेताओं ने उसको झुठलाकर एक उल्टी चीज उनको पढ़ानी शुरू की। और यह खलीफत आंदोलन से शुरू हुआ। और इस अर्थ में मैं समझता हूँ कि बौद्धिक रूप से हिंदू लोग निहत्थे बनते चले गए, जो पहले वो नहीं थे। वो इस्लाम से लड़ते थे, इस्लाम को वो एक लुटेरा मतवाद मानते थे, उसको कभी धर्म और ज्ञान की परंपरा का उसको रुतबा नहीं मिला था। और ये खुद हमारे नेताओं के कारण वो उस प्रपंच में फंस गए जिसमें वो नेता भी फंस गए। और ये उसका उदाहरण देते हैं गोयल जी कि जब ख्वाजा निज़ामी ने, इकबाल ने, जिन्ना ने मुसलमानों का दावा पूरे हिंदुस्तान पर रखा कि भाई ये तो शासक कौम है, इन्होंने शासन किया है तो भारत पर उनका एकाधिकार है, तो राष्ट्रीय कांग्रेस के नेता इसका सुसंगत काट नहीं कर सके, क्योंकि वो पिछले 3-4 दशकों से उन सारे लुटेरों को भारतीय बता रहे थे, उस सारे शासनकाल को हिंदू मुस्लिम सहजता का काल बता रहे थे, जो कि झूठ था, जो कि हिंदू पहले से जानते थे। तो इसके कारण ये इतिहास के प्रति बेपरवाही से भी हिंदू समाज भ्रमित हुआ और वो अपने नेताओं पर निर्भर हो गया जो उनको झूठी बातें बता रहे थे, अनुभव से उल्टी बातें बता रहे थे। लेकिन चूंकि वो उनका आदर करते थे इसलिए चुपचाप उसको सुनते थे, और लंबे समय तक ऐसा होने से धीरे धीरे वह चीज दिमाग में बैठती चली गई। तो ये जो हिंदू समाज भ्रमित होना शुरू हुआ 100 साल पहले, उससे न केवल विभाजन हुआ बल्कि स्वतंत्र भारत की जो शिक्षा बनी उसमें वो विकृत इतिहास और बिगाड़ा गया। और सच तो यह है, दुर्भाग्य की बात है कि हमारे नेताओं और शिक्षा नीतिकारों को इसके दुष्परिणाम का आभास तक नहीं है कि इससे कितनी बुरी बात हुई है, कितना बुरा परिणाम हुआ है। बल्कि आज जो सर्वोच्च लोग हैं हमारे, वो इसी पर गर्व करते हैं कि हमने तो इतिहास में कुछ नहीं बदला। और ठीक जो मैंने उल्लेख किया इस बात को थोड़ा विस्तार से, कि ठीक जिस चीज़ से सीताराम गोयल जैसे विद्वान मानते हैं कि अब हिंदू समाज की चेतना सिर्फ उसी इतिहास के ज्ञान में बची हुई है और उसी को हमारे नीति निर्माता, शासक और ये बौद्धिक लोग उसी को वो झुठलाते हैं और उस पर वो बिल्कुल निश्चेष्ट रहते हैं जैसे वो कोई बात ही नहीं है। इस पृष्ठभूमि में मैं समझता हूँ कि ये पुस्तक जो राम गोपाल मिश्र जी की पुस्तक है, छोटी सी, मुश्किल से 150 पेज की है और अभी भी उपलब्ध है, इंडियन रेजिस्टेंस टू अर्ली मुस्लिम इन्वेडर्स अप टू 1206। मतलब वो 500 साल तक जो इस्लामी हमलावरों ने बार बार भारत के विभिन्न इलाकों पर हमले किए और उसमें उनको कितनी कड़ी टक्कर मिली, उनको हारना पड़ा। और इस तरह से ये जो प्रसंग है, और इसका जो पहला चैप्टर है मिश्र जी की किताब का, उसमें वो इसकी झलक देते हैं कि किसको भारत के लोगों ने हराया। वो भी एक एक राज्य के शक्तियों ने, कोई पूरे भारत ने नहीं हराया उसको। काबुल में शाहिया वंश के लोगों ने 50 साल तक रोके रखा, हराया, बार बार हराया। कश्मीर के ललितादित्य ने हराया, सिंध के जाटों ने हराया, ये गुजरात के जो भीमदेव थे चालुक्य, उन्होंने हराया। और इस तरह से छोटे छोटे जो हमारे प्रांतीय शासक थे आज की दृष्टि से, उन्होंने उन अरब सेनाओं को हराया, उन अरब फौजों को हराया जिसने एक तरह से उस जमाने में दुनिया के उत्तर अफ्रीका से लेकर यूरोप तक इतनी तेजी से कब्जा किया था। उसका पहले वो उल्लेख करते हैं कि 6 महीने के अंदर, मतलब प्रॉफिट के देहांत के बाद जब ये खलीफाओं ने अपना विजय अभियान शुरू किया, तो 636-37 में, आज 6 महीने में बाइजेंटाइन का फिलिस्तीन और सीरिया उनके हाथ से निकल गए। 637 ईस्वी में सिर्फ 1 साल के अंदर पूरा पर्शियन साम्राज्य अरब फौजों ने जीत लिया, जिसमें ईरान, इराक, खुरासान थे, उसकी निर्णायक हार हो गई। 643 ईस्वी तक ही अरब खलीफत की सीमा भारत की सीमा तक वो छू चुके थे। 650 ईस्वी तक उन्होंने उधर भारत को अगर देखा जाए ऊपर से मेहराब की तरह, तो इनर मंगोलिया, बुखारा, ताशकंद, समरकंद तक उन्होंने कब्जा कर लिया। उधर अफ्रीका में बाइजेंटाइन का इजिप्ट उनके हाथ से चला गया, वो ये अरब सेनाओं ने कब्जा कर लिया। और फिर 709 ईस्वी तक वो उनकी सेना उत्तरी अफ्रीका से उधर जाकर के मेडिटेरियन पार करके स्पेन में घुस गई। तो ये प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद के जाने के 50-60 साल के अंदर इन्होंने इतना बड़ा साम्राज्य जीत लिया। और ये रामगोपाल वर्मा जी ध्यान दिलाते हैं, इनफैक्ट सीताराम गोयल जी ध्यान दिलाते हैं, क्योंकि ये जो पुस्तक है एक तरह से उसकी समरी है। सीताराम गोयल जी ने जो उसकी समरी रखी है, तो पहले चैप्टर में वो इसका ध्यान दिलाते हैं कि वो किसको इन लोगों ने हराया। उन लोगों को जिन्होंने 1 साल के अंदर पूरा पर्शिया का साम्राज्य खत्म कर दिया और उधर उत्तर अफ्रीका से लेकर के स्पेन में घुस गए और इधर इनर मंगोलिया से लेकर के उधर चाइना तक पहुंच गए थे। उसको इन काबुल के शासकों ने, सिंध के शासकों ने, गुजरात के शासकों ने लंबे समय तक, लगभग 300 साल तक उनको रोक करके रखा। और वो उल्लेख करते हैं कि भारत में पहली बार पैर टिकाने में भी उन अरब फौजों को 69 साल लगे, लगभग 70 साल। और इस बीच कई लड़ाइयाँ हुई, उसमें कई बार उनके अरब जो जनरल थे वो मारे गए। और इस तरह से जो उनके पहले 4 खलीफा थे, उनको तो एक भी विजय का समाचार तक नहीं मिला, जो बार बार फौजें भेज रहे थे। तो उसका परिणाम ये हुआ कि अंत में जो 5वां खलीफा आया, मुआविया, उसने बगदाद के वो जो उसका गवर्नर था उसको कह दिया कि अब मत भेजो फौज वहाँ जाकर के हम बर्बाद होते हैं, जीतते नहीं हैं और हमारा इतना नुकसान होता है। बाकायदा वो उसका पत्र इसमें उद्धृत है इस पुस्तक में। तो 69 वर्ष लगे उनको पहली बार पैर टिकाने में। और सिंध में जो 712 वाली जीत की चर्चा होती है, तो ये बात भुला दिया जाता है कि उससे पहले लगभग 636 से लेकर के 50-60 साल तक उन्होंने लगातार हमले किए और हर बार उनकी हार हुई। और जहां वो थोड़ी बहुत जीतते भी थे तो उनको जल्द ही फिर से उनको हटना पड़ता था। तो ये इस पुस्तक का जो ये एक पहला मैसेज है कि ये जो एक गलत प्रचार है कि हम हारते ही जाते थे, ये बिल्कुल गलत है। और ये पुस्तक इनफैक्ट इन्हीं 2 मिथकों को तोड़ने के दृष्टि से बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है। ये दिखाती है कि अरब फौजों को तो कोई सफलता एक तरह से नहीं ही मिली, और जो थोड़ी मिली भी तो अगले 3 शताब्दी तक, मतलब 10वीं शताब्दी तक भी जो अरब के लोग नोट करते थे, तो एक मुल्तान और एक और जगह थी, उसी को वो सिर्फ नोट करते थे कि यही अरब प्रिंसिपैलिटी है, मतलब एक छोटी सी जगह। तो एक तरह से वो भारत के सीमावर्ती इलाके में ही फंस करके रहे लगभग 300 सालों तक। और उसके बाद भी जो आगे वर्णन मिलता है तो यही कि ये उस जमाने की जो सबसे ताकतवर फौज थी, उसको पूरे भारत की ताकत ने नहीं, बल्कि वो कपीशा, पंजाब, सिंध, गुजरात के क्षेत्रीय शासकों ने हटाया। तो पहले 3 अध्यायों में उस पुस्तक में इसी का वर्णन है कि किस तरह से अरबों को ये लगातार हमले के बावजूद न केवल हारना पड़ा, बल्कि उनकी बड़ी हानि हुई। कई बार उनसे फाइन लिया गया, उनके जनरल मारे गए। बल्कि एक उल्लेख तो यहाँ तक मिलता है कि एक प्रिंस सिंध का, शायद सिंध का, अगर मुझे ठीक से याद है, सिंध का ही कोई राजकुमार बगदाद के टिग्रिस नदी तक पहुंच गया था पीछा करते करते। तो ये एक गौरवशाली अध्याय है इस रूप में कि भारत के इतिहास के प्रति जो एक विकृत समझ बनाई गई है, जिसका मैंने शुरू में उल्लेख किया, जिससे जिससे हमारी पूरी मानसिकता, राजनीतिक मानसिकता और शैक्षिक मानसिकता पूरी तरह विकृत हो चुकी है, यह पुस्तक उसको खंडित करती है कम से कम 2 मुद्दों पर। और उसमें ये इसका पहले 3 अध्याय में इसी बात का वर्णन है कि किस तरह से अरबों को, जो उस जमाने की सबसे ताकतवर सेना थी और जिसने एक-एक साल में, 6-6 महीने में, 5-5 साल में बड़े-बड़े साम्राज्यों को खत्म कर दिया। और खत्म ही नहीं किया, एक और महत्वपूर्ण बात कहते हैं राम गोपाल जी और सीताराम गोयल जी, उन्होंने सिर्फ क्षेत्रीय कब्जा नहीं किया था, उन लोगों ने, इन अरब फौजों ने, इन खलीफत ने, इस्लामी फौजों ने वहाँ की भाषा संस्कृति को खत्म कर दिया और उसको इस्लामाइज कर लिया। और इस दृष्टि से देखा जाए तो उनकी सिंध विजय भी कुछ भी साबित नहीं हुई, क्योंकि अगले 300-400 साल के बाद भी, बल्कि हाल तक भी, जब फिर से मुगल साम्राज्य खत्म भी हो गया था, तब भी जो उत्तर पूर्वी भारत है उसको रिलेटिवली विश्व में उसको हीथन एरिया ही कहा जाता था। मतलब न केवल कि उनको अपना शासन जमाने में 500 साल लगे, बल्कि 500 साल राज करके भी जब वो चले गए या हार गए, तब भी वो किसी क्षेत्र को इस तरह से इस्लामाइज नहीं कर सके कि दुनिया उसको इस्लामी क्षेत्र मानती, दुनिया उसको हिंदू क्षेत्र मानती थी औरंगजेब की पराजय के बाद भी। तो ये एक बहुत बड़ी बात है जिस पर सीताराम गोयल ने और रामगोपाल मिश्रा जी ने ध्यान दिलाया कि जिन इस्लामी फौजों ने पूरी की पूरी सभ्यताएं उजाड़ दी, यहाँ पर न केवल उनको टिकने में इतना लंबा समय लगा, बल्कि जीतने के बाद भी वो यहाँ की सभ्यता, संस्कृति, भाषा, धर्म को मिटा नहीं सके। और ये दोनों बिंदु बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है जी।
Okay, Conrad, you heard Shankar Sharan ji, and basically he's talking about the first 3 chapters. Why do you think this book is important?
Well, he explains it in the introduction that the national vision of a united India held by a Hindu nation that can defend itself against intruders, that vision is being compromised, is being denied, is being trampled by current education. And so one of the things that Hindus have massively been led to believe is that Hindus have always been soft and weak and not capable of defending themselves. This is a legend that has been used a few times in history, like when the British conquered the Mughal governor in Bengal, 1757. And so the Bengalis, the Hindu Bengalis, applauded the British and were sort of grateful to them. So this became the big British paradigm of, okay, you see, the Hindus have been the victims and we are the liberators. From there also you get the idea that the British Empire replaced the Mughal Empire, that there was nothing in between. And so it denies the Hindu defeat of the Mughal Empire effectively, so that most of India was ruled by Hindu rulers, mostly the Marathas, the Sikhs, the Rajputs. So that's something Hindus did themselves. They didn't need British help for that. And so it has happened earlier. We often don't know, because most of the Muslim history in India is known through Muslim historians. And so it's a big job for Hindus to do the missing part of history, which is the Hindu version. Like, for instance, here you have something done by the secularists. It's called Representing the Other, Sanskrit Sources and the Muslims by Brajadulal Chattopadhyay. So this book here. Now, This is a secularist operation in trying to blur the distinction between Hindu and Muslim. And so it selects passages from Sanskrit texts where Hindus more or less accept the fact of Muslim dominance. and talk offhand about Muslim rulers, Mahamuda Surat Rana being Sultan, so Sultan Muhammad, and so on, which is, of course, the only thing that Hindus in the circumstances could do. I mean, if they gave an account of reality, the reality was that their ruler at that time was a Muslim. Okay, but so this is all spun in such a way that it maximizes Hindu acceptance of Muslim rule, Hindu non-objection, non-resistance to Muslim rule. Now, what is needed here is historians who do the rest of the work, who bring out the left out parts in these Sanskrit and other vernacular sources. And so what you have there, and it's hinted at a few times in Goel's book, is that there are some Hindu chronicles that give a far less flattering account of the Muslim conquests. Well, the word flattering, of course, I have to qualify a bit. When the Muslim sources are very open, very proud of describing the destructions they wrought, today that would not be called flattery. Today they would say, oh, this is against human rights and so on. But back then, you see, that was a show of strength. And so what was missing, on the other hand, was a concession of the defeats they also suffered. So we can see, for example, that in the very, very decisive war between Prithviraj Chauhan of Ajmer and Muhammad Ghori in the 1180s, there were a number of defeats of Ghori by Prithviraj. Then there was a defeat in the battle, the victory of Prithviraj, the defeat of Muhammad in the first battle of Tarain. Then finally, the reversal of fortune with the defeat of Prithviraj. And then the decisive breakthrough of the Muslim forces into the Hindu heartland. Now, in Muslim sources, those that are usually used, like in Eliot and Dawson's History of India as told by its own historians, which of course aren't really its own historians. It's India-based Muslim historians. But still,
Correct.
you see, the sources used there only refer to the two battles of Tarain. So the first battle couldn't be skipped because it's intimately connected with the second battle. But so all the other defeats of Muhammad Ghori are obscured, are hidden. So that's also a reason why, on the basis of the historical sources in use, Hindus have been credibly sold the story, the version that Hindus didn't give any brave account of themselves, that they were a walkover for the Muslims. So that's a very important lesson, that there is a difference between the present day version believed by most Hindus and the real history. It is not the Hindu version versus the secularist version or so. No, it is the real historical version versus the secularist propaganda version. That I think is the main object of this book, freeing Hindus from their inferiority complex, which they have vis-a-vis Muslim strength. And you see, Hindus have a bit of a superiority complex also in cultural matters, which goes back to the day when India was the center of the world, so to speak, when the Arabs, for example, worshipped India as the ideal country, the utopia, when they borrowed the Indian numerals into Arabic and so on. So in those days, Hindus felt very superior. And that mentality is still sketched by Al-Biruni, who was a scholar accompanying the conqueror Mahmud Ghaznavi. This is around the year 1000. So he describes Hindus think that there is nothing like their country, nothing like their culture. They feel completely superior, and also on the negative side, self-absorbed. You see, they are not aware of the outside world, and implicitly for a Muslim writer, they are not aware of Islam. And so that's an ancient Hindu mentality of which you still see elements in the Hindu mentality. But when it comes to political struggle, to communal struggle, there indeed they feel inferior to Muslims, even though they shouldn't, because when you look, for instance, at the Indo-Pak wars, you can see that the Pakistanis always start the wars, but they always get defeated. You know, if these wars don't end up very well, it is because Hindu politicians throw away the gains made on the battlefield. But on the battlefield, the Hindus clearly are superior to the Muslims. Can't put it any other way. They always win.
Yeah, okay. So they always win on the battlefield, or they fritter away the gains later on. Uh, I remember the famous story of Rana Kumbha, who actually imprisoned Mahmud Khilji, one of the breakaway Khilji satraps. And after 6 months, suddenly he released him and sent him away with gifts. So those are the kind of foolish generosities that the Hindus have indulged in and suffered for that. शंकर शरण जी, इसके जो चौथा चैप्टर है वो मुझे लगता है बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है, और इस चौथे चैप्टर का इंग्लिश में जो कहता है कि परफिडी विंस वेयर वैलर फेल्ड, और मुझे लगता है कि इसकी जानकारी हमारे सारे छात्रों को और हमारे प्रबुद्ध वर्ग को और अन्य वर्ग को भी, लगभग सभी को होना आवश्यक है। और उसके लिए फिर, क्योंकि इसका जो 8वां चैप्टर है उसमें जो सीताराम जी की बहुत प्रसिद्ध पुस्तक है जो स्टोरी ऑफ इस्लामिक इम्पीरियलिज्म, उसमें भी आएगा। लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि इसका यहाँ पर विश्लेषण करना आवश्यक है।
ये तो है। अभी जैसे कोनराड कह रहे थे कि हिंदुओं में एक सुपीरियरिटी कॉम्प्लेक्स भी रहा है और वो आज भी है। तो जब वो इसमें एक उल्लेख आता है, आपने राणा कुंभा वाला जो उदाहरण दिया, एक उदाहरण इसमें पृथ्वीराज चौहान का भी है। हाँ, वो मोहम्मद गोरी को उन्होंने, मुझे लगता है कि 3 या 4 बार हराया, और हर बार वो उसको छोड़ देते थे। और जब वो आखिरी बार जब उसका वो फिर चढ़ाई करने आया और उसने पृथ्वीराज को जो मैसेज भेजा कि भाई तुम सरेंडर कर दो, इस्लाम कबूल कर लो, वरना मैं चढ़ाई करूँगा, तो उसको जो पृथ्वीराज ने जवाब दिया है वो पत्र इसमें उद्धृत है, और वो उसमें वही मानसिकता है। उसमें पृथ्वीराज कहते हैं कि तुमको इतनी बार मैंने पकड़ा, तुमको छोड़ दिया, इस बार भी मैं तुमको हराऊंगा, पकड़ूंगा और फिर छोड़ दूंगा। ये उस पत्र में लिखा हुआ है। तो और फिर आगे उसका वर्णन भी आता है कि किस तरह से उसने धोखा दे करके पृथ्वीराज को हराया। कि जब वो उसने संदेशा भेजा कि ठीक है, मैं तो क्या कहूँ, मैं तो उधर से आया हूँ और मैं जरा उनसे कंसल्ट करता हूँ। उसने एक तरह का हिंट दिया कि मैं चढ़ाई नहीं करने जा रहा हूँ। और जब राजपूत सेना और पृथ्वीराज जब इस भाव में थे कि अभी चढ़ाई नहीं होने वाली है, तो उसने अर्ली मॉर्निंग उसने चढ़ाई कर दी। इसके बावजूद वर्णन ऐसा आता है कि इसके बावजूद वह बिल्कुल अनप्रिपेयर्ड राजपूत भी उनको लगभग हरा चुके थे, लेकिन कुछ कहीं पर दुर्भाग्यवश भी कुछ प्राकृतिक घटना घटी, मुझे ठीक याद नहीं आ रहा है, जिसके कारण वो उनकी हार हो गई। तो ये परफीडी ये बार बार आता है और कई जगह इसके वर्णन है, घूरी के साथ भी है, गजनवी के साथ भी है कि जब वो, और उससे पहले भी जब अरब लोग अटैक कर रहे थे काबुल पर, कपीशा पर, तब भी इसके उदाहरण मिलते हैं कि जब वो सीधे सीधे लड़ाई में नहीं जीत पाते थे तो चूंकि उनके पास कोई नैतिकता नहीं थी, और ये जो भारतीय राजा थे वे अपने हिंदू नैतिकता से चलते थे, जैसा ये पृथ्वीराज का उदाहरण बताता है कि वो अपनी राजपूत पराक्रम पर भरोसा रखते थे कि हम तो उसको जितनी बार वो अटैक करेगा हम उतनी बार उसको हराएंगे, और जो भाग रहा है उसको नहीं मारना है, जो उसने हाथ उठा दिया उसको नहीं मारना है। और इन कारणों से वो उतनी भयंकर इस्लामी जीवट वाली सेनाओं को कई बार हरा करके भी, और एक आध बार तो इस अवस्था में कि वो पूरी तरह उनको मटियामेट कर सकते थे, उस समय भी उन्होंने उसको इसलिए नहीं उसको खत्म किया कि उनकी अपनी नैतिकता के हिसाब से, हिंदू नैतिकता के हिसाब से जो भाग रहा है, जो निहत्था है, जिसने हार मान ली है, उसको नहीं मारना चाहिए, उसको खत्म नहीं करना चाहिए। तो एक फॉरवर्ड पॉलिसी का अभाव जो बार बार इसमें आता है पुस्तक में भी, उसका अभाव एक बड़ा कारण था कि उनको बार बार इसका मौका मिलने पर भी वो इसका उपयोग नहीं कर सके, और धीरे धीरे वो मुस्लिम सेनाओं ने, उनके शासकों ने हिंदुओं का चरित्र समझ लिया, इनकी कमजोरियां पकड़ ली, इनका जो गुमान था उसको भी पकड़ा, और इनके नियम थे उसका भी दुरुपयोग किया। और इस तरह से जैसे पहले भी 10वीं शताब्दी में जब वो अरबों का हमला होता था तो मुल्तान में एक विवरण मिलता है किसी मुस्लिम इतिहासकार का ही, शायद अरब इतिहासकार का ही, अल इस्तखरी, वो लिखता है कि मुल्तान भी ये जीत सकते थे फिर से हिंदू, लेकिन वो जब वो जमा होकर के जीतने आते थे तो मुल्तान में जो मंदिर था, प्रसिद्ध सूर्य मंदिर, उसकी एक बड़ी प्रसिद्ध प्रतिमा थी, वो उसको मुसलमान बाहर निकाल देते थे और उसको कहते थे कि अगर तुम आगे बढ़े तो हम इसको तोड़ देंगे। तो उस प्रतिमा को बचाने के लिए हिंदू जो पूरी तरह ताकतवर थे, पूरे मुल्तान को फिर से कब्जा कर सकते थे, वो छोड़ देते थे। तो कहने का मतलब यह है कि शुरू से लेकर अंत तक हिंदुओं की कमजोरी उन्होंने समझ ली, और हिंदू शासक और ये योद्धा वो उनकी विशेषता को समझ नहीं पाए। तो इसीलिए जब उन्होंने ये धोखाधड़ी का इस्तेमाल किया तो उससे उनकी जीत हुई। एक आध बार दुर्घटना भी हुई, जैसे पृथ्वीराज के साथ भी हुई, आगे फिर अकबर वाले प्रसंग में भी हुई। तो लेकिन खैर वो तो बात की बात है। ये पुस्तक 12वीं सदी तक ही है जब उन्होंने पहली बार अपना पक्का अधिकार किया था। तो इसका महत्व इसी बात में है कि हिंदू लोग जैसा कि अभी कोनराड ने भी कहा कि हिंदू लोग आश्चर्यजनक रूप से 1000 सालों के इंटरैक्शन के बावजूद इस्लाम के चरित्र को ठीक से इनके शासक और इनके बड़े लोग, इनके एलिट नहीं समझ पाए हैं, बल्कि जितना समझा भी था। और ये इस पुस्तक का ये एक महत्वपूर्ण विश्लेषण है जो सीताराम गोयल जी करते हैं कि वही आखिरी अध्यायों में कि ये जो अब जो हिंदू स्टेट है, अब इसकी स्थिति बिल्कुल अलग है। ये वो हिंदू स्टेट नहीं है जो कि पृथ्वीराज के समय में था या उसके बाद भी जहाँ तहाँ था। अब ये हिंदू स्टेट सिर्फ नाम का ही है, अब इसमें हिंदुत्व नाम की कोई चीज़ नहीं है। ये एक तरह का धिम्मी स्टेट में बदल गया है। ये सभी हिंदू चीज़ों पर नाक बहुत सिकोड़ता है और सारे पॉलिटिकल पार्टी, सारे पॉलिटिकल लीडर्स इस्लाम को बढ़ावा देते हैं, इस्लाम के सामने झुकते हैं और हिंदू चीज़ों के बारे में वो एक तरह से नीचा भाव रखते हैं। तो ऐसी स्थिति में हम आज एक खतरनाक मुकाम पर हैं। ये सीताराम गोयल जी आखिरी 2 अध्यायों में उसका वर्णन करते हैं कि अगर हम समय रहते नहीं संभले तो ये भूल बड़ी मर्मांतक हो सकती है और फिर इससे निकलना शायद संभव नहीं हो सकेगा। जी
Okay, Conrad, can you sum this up for us, this particular discussion?
Well, Goel's conclusion is, of course, something to be taken to heart. So this reinterpretation of the history is important, and so I recommend everyone to read it. But the conclusion is even more important, because, of course, what happened in in like 1000 or 1200 or so is relatively far away. You see, we have a situation now where the challenges are partly the same and partly different. Hindus have now outsourced their defenses to a professional army. The common Hindu is less and less militarized, is less and less in a defense mood. Unlike in the past, when it was fairly easy to mobilize a peasant population, if necessary, when necessary, to defend themselves, to take up arms. This is also true for Pakistan and Bangladesh, only they invest a lot more in their armies. Today, of course, the power equation is still such that India's army is too much for them to take on. But they know what they want. They know where they're going. So their strength in the normal course of things can only rise, whereas India's is probably going down. You see, demographically, of course, both the neighbors in the east and west are gaining on India. In fact, Pakistan is slated to be the third most populous country in the world before the United States. Then institutionally too, the Islamic character of Pakistan and Bangladesh is not in doubt at all. In some of the Middle Eastern countries, you have a weakening of Islam among the Muslim population, as yet only silently. They're not making a public show of it. Like, for instance, I know about a Lebanon-based movement of Arabic neo-paganism, where they hark back to the pre-Islamic religion of the Arabs. Now, that's, of course, all very discreet. But nevertheless, these things are happening. I am not aware of any such in Pakistan or Bangladesh or India, because here the Muslim community is very much mobilized against the Hindus. By contrast, the Hindus are not mobilized at all. And the whole education system, the whole cultural output is precisely geared to demobilizing them, to keep them from mobilizing. And so one part of it is in historical movies, you know, that element of Hindu cowardice, or you see Hindu tendency to be defeated, to be weak, to be on the run. That is, of course, also propagated as one part of it, but it's much larger. And so, a very, very necessary part of waging a struggle, a war, or even a non military struggle is precisely that you are clear about your goals, that you know where you're going. And so, that is gravely missing at the moment. He at the end of his this book, he has a chapter called "Hindu Society Has to Seize the State." You see, that is very important because in the modern configuration, you need a state as an institution capable of representing and defending you. Now, the Indian state at the moment is not at all a Hindu state. It's not at all wedded to Hindu interests. Now, someone will say, yeah, like all these foreigners who believe the secularist version that they are constantly fed, many Indians read that same version. It was but the BJP is in power. You see, now you have a Hindu India. Well, there, of course, I have to say that that is not the case. And I mean, this is my refrain. You see, in 2021, I keep saying it because I keep noticing it all the time in government decisions. There is no element of concern for the Hindu interest. There's plenty of appeasement, and also on other Hindu items, except for the equation with Islam. You see, like for instance, the language issue. This is something dear to my heart. Um, I hadn't noticed, but I've recently been informed that the Uttar Pradesh state government has changed many Hindi medium schools into English medium schools. That's not at all what I expected, because upon coming to power, Yogi Adityanath had done precisely the reverse. He had strengthened Hindi education. You have this law in Andhra Pradesh overruling a Supreme Court decision to change Telugu medium schools into English medium schools. Now, you see, some people say, "Oh, but this is only a practical thing. It's only to get a job in technology and so on." Well, no, it's a very fundamental issue, and it's no wonder that Christians, for instance, and secularists vehemently support this. For them, it's not some some minor issue. No, no, for them, this is a very important instrument to weaning the Hindu population away from Hindu dharma. You see, if you read English literature and so on, you're going to develop a wholly different frame of reference. Your knowledge about the Mahabharata and so on will inevitably be much less. And so I see no Hindu reaction against this. On the contrary, you see, the so-called Hindu government is precisely pursuing such policies. There is this new education policy, which makes a few gestures to the vernaculars, but essentially corroborates English as the real medium of education and of administration to a large extent. So you see, if you give that like concrete strength to English, then it's just here to stay. I mean, this government was the last chance you had to reverse the policy of Anglicization, which also means cultural Americanization, and which means the onward march of secularism and of Christianity. So it's a very important consequential issue, and the government is just doing the wrong thing. It's not doing what is needed for Hindu interests. You have other issues like the anti-Hindu discrimination since the constitution. You have the issue of the guardianship of temples, where they, just like Congress governments, you see, try to milk the temples for their income and keep them to themselves, to government officials, rather than giving them back to the Hindu worshippers, and so on. I mean, I can't think of an issue where this government has proven to be a real Hindu government. So in the Middle Ages, it was no question about who is a Hindu, what is Hindu, and so on. There was a physical fight, yes, but the notion of Hindu, the identification with Hindu dharma was not compromised. Okay, some people, with a sword on their throat, converted to Islam, but what Hinduism was, there was no question about it. And most people somehow managed to keep on following. And you see today, and this is the big difference with the period of the heroic Hindu resistance, now there is a great self-doubt among Hindus. And so they're not sure anymore of what they defend, how to defend, and so on. And so that's a great weakness. And since that weakness does not exist on the side of their adversaries, it means that they are losing ground. And so I don't immediately have a conclusion about what to do, but you certainly, first of all, have to realize the problem. So that is even more than when Sitaram Goel wrote this book. the problem that Hindu society faces. You see, heroic Hindu resistance will not be enough. First of all, you need to re-root yourself in Hinduism.
Quite right. I think a lot of lessons to be learned, and of course, the Prithviraj Chauhan syndrome, it still rules all our ruling classes. We saw that during the Shimla Agreement after 1971. And well, I don't know what today's meeting with the Jammu and Kashmir parties was. I just hope that this is not another exhibition of Prithviraj Chauhan syndrome. Uh, Let me request all the viewers, please ask your questions because now we are going to move to question answer session. Before that, I have to request all the viewers to please subscribe to the channel, share this video, like this video, and of course, I'll always request you to please do your little contribution to our cause, if you may, questions and answers. Cool user, thank you. Abhishek Anand. Hindus fought Muslims, but did they fight Islam? Oh, good question. They will get a copy of the book, How I Became a Hindu. Okay, Abhishek, you win that book. Good question. Conrad.
They didn't study Islam, but you see, at that moment, the behavior of Islam was clear enough. You see, so they didn't really need the books to know what the problem was with Islam. But yes, of course, it would have been better if they had studied Islam. And so that I don't see happening. When the Portuguese arrive in South India, the debate with Christianity starts very soon. This is mainly because the Christians themselves initiate the debate. They start arguing with Hindus, oh, but you are so superstitious. You see, look at these Vedas, you see, they have nothing but puerile stuff. That's what Max Muller said. And, you don't even know about Jesus. You're not even saved. Come on, you see, let's do something about that. And then Hindus started answering that. So you see, there are a number of papers written by Hindus already in 1700 and so on. Not that these had much influence, but all right, you see, an attempt was made. Now, I am not aware of any such anti-Islam papers. The very first one I know of is the Satyartha Prakash by Swami Dayanand Saraswati. So that's like 1875. And even that is not very sophisticated. But okay, it was a start. Then the first really serious work is by Pandit Lekram, who was murdered for his efforts in the 1890s. Then there are some scurrilous, not so intelligent works like Rangila Rasul, the the colorful prophet, meaning effectively Playboy Muhammad. So about the sex life of the prophet, that's just little gossip, and even if his way of life was not what you think ideal, he might still have received messages from Allah, so it's not very very to the point. So no, you see, those heroes, even Shivaji and so on, they did not study Islam, but they knew enough about Islam from seeing it in practice. I mean, the stuff about Allahu Akbar and the great slogans of Islam, they already tell a story. You don't have to know the details, but La ilaha illallah, there's no God except Allah, so all your gods are false. Okay, that's not difficult to comprehend. And the implications in practice were there for all to see. So they didn't study Islam, but nevertheless, to some extent, they fought Islam.
Okay, next question. Mohit Kumar, namaste आप तीनों को. In Calcutta Quran petition, Goel ji writes that Genghis Khan is most feared and hated by Muslims. Then why so many Khans in India today? Case of confused identity. Yeah, Koenraad.
That's simple. The Mughals were descendants of Genghis Khan on, I think, the father's side of Timur and on the mother's side of Genghis Khan. And so they were entirely part of that setup. And so Khan is a Mongol title, which the Mughals brought into India, or even earlier Turkish invaders, because the Turks were sort of the foot soldiers of the Mongols. They were, a big ethnic conglomerate. So once they had been Islamized, they invaded India and brought this term into India. And so many Muslims actually think that Genghis Khan was a Muslim because of this name. So it's funny. Those, of course, who know better, they fear his name because, in fact, I don't think there's anyone who killed more Muslims than he did. And his immediate sons and grandsons also did a few things like Hülegu Khan killed the whole population of Baghdad, for example. So those who know better, you see, will see the negative side of Genghis Khan, but very many think he was one of them.
Next. Gauri Dani. Didn't the secular historians realize that writing a glorious Mughal history would result in their destruction as well, just as how Islamic rulers destroyed their contemporaries, causing genocides across the globe? It appears that historians were writing history for Islamic nations instead of India. Who was the beneficiary of such distortions? Yeah, Conrad, you can take this also.
It is a common phenomenon that uh, other power seekers, especially the Marxists, make alliances with Islam. And so there was a time when they themselves would profit from the alliance, like in the creation of the Soviet Union. The Bolsheviks had to rally the masses to rebelling against the Tsarist forces and later the so-called white armies that were the remainders of the Tsarist forces. And so to whip up hatred amongst the Central Asian populations, talk about economics was not good enough. There they needed Islam. So they launched this thing called Inkilab Zindabad, long live the revolution. And nobody knew exactly what revolution was. An Inkilab is clearly a change of whoever has the power. So if it means no more Tsar, no more Christianity, but Islam, well, that's more or less what those people understood. So they fought bravely. And then by the time the Bolsheviks had more or less taken control of the territory, they also destroyed this Islamic resistance. And Muslims were treated a little bit better than Christians. Christian priests were massively killed. Churches were turned into stables and whatever. Mosques were a bit better treated, but still, it was no longer an Islamic country. And whereas the Tsar had, in fact, more or less left the Muslim religion alone, the Bolsheviks started indoctrinating the new generations in atheism. So at that time, another force than Islam managed to profit from an alliance with Islam. Later, you get different scenarios, like in Iran, where the Communist Party made an alliance with Ayatollah Khomeini to overthrow the Shah in 1979. And then the Ayatollahs killed all the communists. So it's a gamble. But in the case of India, nobody expects this change of power to be that soon. So it'll last the lifetime of the present secularists. So maybe one day, if the Muslims come to power in India, they will turn against the secularists, as they, for instance, also have done in East Bengal in 1947. The communists supported the partition plan. And once the partition happened, then they were friendly asked to leave. So, so it's risky, but it's long term. And for now, you see, the secularists have their mind set on destroying Hinduism. And you see, partly also they believe their own propaganda. When Hindus like Sitaram Goel warn against Islam, they poo-poo this, they say, oh, this is paranoia, you know. And so to some extent they believe this. You know, they refuse to see the danger that Islam might present. So that's, I mean, basically why this happens is part ignorance and partly a calculated risk that the alliance with Islam is needed in order to overpower Hinduism. A third aspect that they don't highlight, but that they are certainly aware of, that I am aware of, is the fact that Hindus themselves are more deferent to Islam than to secularism. Like you can see this present government, you see throwing all these presents to Muslims, and the RSS has a Muslim Morcha, uh, you know, so not a secular. So has gone secular itself as a whole. But at
That
any
Muslim
rate,
Morcha is a joke,
hmm?
actually. That Muslim Morcha is a joke.
Yeah, well, okay. Okay, but the fact that they feel the need to have one shows their mentality. You see, their subservience to Islam, their eagerness to appease Islam. And so the secularists know this. They don't say it, you know, they like to say to the world that the BJP is a fanatical Hindu movement. It is not at all. And so if these Hindus, if such Hindus are faced with Islam, they become very subdued, which is what we are seeing in this government at the moment.
Yes, indeed. Quite right. Next one. डिफेंस ऑफ हिंदूज। बाजीराव सरकार ने मुगलों के सामने युद्ध से बचने के लिए जो 45 शर्तें रखी थी, उसमें प्रयाग, गया, मथुरा, बनारस को हिंदुओं को देने की शर्त भी थी। पेशवा इस्लाम के प्रति सचेत थे। जी, शंकर शरण जी।
ये तो अभी कोनराड ने ठीक ही कहा कि जो उस जमाने के शासक थे हिंदू, उनके लिए इस्लाम को समझने के लिए कुछ बाकी नहीं था। वो प्रत्यक्ष रूप से उसको देख रहे थे और जान रहे थे, और इस्लामी शासक को भी छिपाने के लिए कुछ नहीं था। वो इस गुमान में थे कि उनको तो कब्जा करना ही है। तो दोनों पक्ष एक दूसरे को बिल्कुल साफ साफ देख रहे थे। आज हिंदुओं की स्थिति बहुत ही खराब हो चुकी है, जो अभी कोनराड ने संकेत भी किया। एक तो इस्लामी शासकों को पिछले 100 सालों से, ये मेरा मत है कि जब से गांधी जी आए, मतलब ठीक 100 साल हुए 1920 खलीफत आंदोलन से, उन्होंने इस्लाम की एक झूठी तस्वीर बनाई, उसको नोबेल फत का तमगा दिया, जो उससे पहले ना तो भारतीय शासक मानते थे, ना भारतीय एलिट मानते थे, ना और बिल्कुल कॉमन हिंदू तो बिल्कुल नहीं मानते थे। तो ऐसी स्थिति में ये कोई समस्या नहीं थी। जब भी कोई हिंदू सशक्त होता था तो वो उन चीज़ों को अपने आप वापस लेता था। वो महाराजा रंजीत सिंह में भी हम देखते हैं कि उन्होंने जब अफगानिस्तान के शासक पर कब्जा किया तो उससे कहा कि वो सोमनाथ का जो दरवाजा ले गए हो वो तुम वापस लौटाओ। तो ये चेतना उनमें कूट कूट कर भरी हुई थी। आज स्थिति बिल्कुल उल्टी हो गई है। न केवल कि कोई हिंदू स्टेट नहीं है, न केवल कि कोई हिंदू पक्ष, कॉन्शस हिंदू पॉलिटिकल फोर्स नहीं है, बल्कि जो लोग हिंदू फोर्स, हिंदू नेशनलिस्ट या हिंदू सेकुलरिस्ट, हिंदू लेफ्टिस्ट, हिंदू लिबरल जो भी हैं, वो सबके सब इस्लाम के प्रति झुके हुए हैं। तो पेशवा को याद करके आज कहना मुश्किल है कि हमें क्या मिलता है, क्योंकि आज तो हमारे सामने कोई पेशवा नहीं है, आज तो हमारे सामने कोई पृथ्वीराज तक नहीं है। हम कहते तो हैं कि पृथ्वीराज सिंड्रोम है, लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि उसको बदल के अब इसको गांधी सिंड्रोम कहना ज़्यादा उचित है, क्योंकि पृथ्वीराज तो कम से कम लड़ने के लिए तैयार थे। गांधी जी से तो ये शुरू हुआ कि नहीं, वो आकर के तुमको अटैक भी करे तो तुमको नहीं लड़ना है, तुमको चुपचाप मर जाना है, यही धर्म है। तो हमारा हिंदू धर्म का अर्थ विकृत हो गया, हमारे लिए इस्लाम का अर्थ विकृत हो गया, हमारा इतिहास झुठला दिया गया, और अब हमारे सामने कोई हिंदू शासक, हिंदू पॉलिटिकल पार्टी, हिंदू पॉलिटिकल फोर्स भी नहीं है। और जो लोग हैं वो उल्टे इस्लाम को चाह रहे हैं, जो अभी कोनराड ने संकेत किया। तो अगर सारी सारी फोर्सेज इस्लाम को चाह रही हैं, उन्हीं को आगे बढ़ा रही हैं, यहाँ तक कि कानूनन इस्लाम की स्थिति भारत में ऊपर है। कोनराड एल्स 20 साल से कह रहे हैं कि वो जो संविधान की आर्टिकल 25 से 30 है, उसको कम से कम बराबर करना सबसे आसान है और सबसे फंडामेंटल है। इसको करना तो दूर, कोई पॉलिटिकल पार्टी इसको उठाती तक नहीं है। तो मैं तो कुछ उल्टा महसूस कर रहा हूँ कि आज हिंदुओं की स्थिति पृथ्वीराज के ज़माने से, यहाँ तक कि मुझे लगता है औरंगजेब के ज़माने से खराब हो चुकी है। कम से कम उस समय लड़ने की चेतना थी। आज तो अगर किसी में लड़ने की चेतना है तो उसी का मजाक उड़ाया जाता है, और बावजूद इसके कि वो बेचारा लड़ने की स्थिति में भी नहीं है।
जी। SP Ram sir, what about the West? The West invited people from Turkey and Morocco. Muslim population is rising, immigration and birth rate. Koenraad.
It's the same situation as in India that is developing. So in France, the Muslim population is already approaching the Indian percentage. In Belgium, Holland, Germany, England, it's still behind, but it's getting there now. And so you can see that Muslims there are wresting more and more privileges. Like a very hot item all the time is the wearing of the veil. And so in Belgium recently, the policy of outlawing veils, at least in public functions and in schools, has been partly reversed, and there's no chance of turning back. Now, I don't think that this veil is a very important issue, although maybe, women who have fled from countries where they were forced to wear a veil do think more seriously about it. I don't want to prejudge that, but at any rate, you see, this is part of more serious items, halal food and so on. Now, these things still do not have to do with political power, though they are a bit of a show of power. Look, we can wrest these privileges. And so you're going to hear more of that. Demographically, it's not very different from India. So very soon, these percentages will be about the same. And in both cases, if nothing spectacular happens, then before the end of the century, the majority of the population, both in Europe, certainly in Western Europe, and in India, will be Muslim. That's for sure. So that's why you should do what Sitaram Goel at the end of this book advised. Namely, we have to liberate our own Muslim mass from the stranglehold of mullahs and Muslim politicians. The Muslim masses are our own people who have been alienated from their ancestral society and culture by the ideology of Islam. You see, that's really the only option you have, because thinking of demographic warfare, that's not going to go anywhere. Muslims have more children than Hindus do, just as in Europe, they have more children than Europeans do. And even if their birth rate is coming down, gradually it is always behind on the non-Muslim birth rate. So there's always more children being born in the Muslim community. Like you know about the figure I last read about Kerala, where 26% of Muslims have 42% of the newborn children. So this goes very fast. Um, so you know, and of course, too many people now are convinced that the world is overpopulated, India is overpopulated anyway. The government is not promoting large families and so on. So nothing is going to come of it. Forget it. You see, if you want to survive, the best thing you can do is to bring the Muslims back. Ghar wapasi. So you see, whatever clumsy things may have happened in the context of Ghar wapasi, the fundamental principle is entirely correct. And it's historically correct because indeed, some people treat Muslims like a different race, like whites and blacks in America or so. Even them, I don't think should be at loggerheads. But okay, in the case of India, it's not even that. You are dealing with your own people. Even if they tell stories about, oh, I was a descendant of Muhammad bin Qasim or so, because these stories are very common in Muslim circles that they have Turkish descent and so on. You see, that is very, very meager. Maybe some paternal ancestor 500 years ago was someone from Uzbekistan or so. Then he married or he fathered a child on an Indian woman. And you see, then it became more and more Indian with every generation. So, for all practical purposes, Indian Muslims are just Indians, are really your own people, even racially. And so, it is perfectly correct that you bring them back in the sense that, there is no reason why they should have been estranged from your society except by the force of arms. And so, when that force of arms is no longer there, for as long as this present situation lasts, you just make them see reason and bring them back.
Right. So this appears to be to a good question. So this I'll shortlist for a book. Okay, next. I'm just told by my desk that the book cannot be dispatched internationally. So sorry, SP. Next, Shankadeep. Why is the whole world supporting Islamic causes? I think that question has been answered multiple times during the course of this. But still, if you can make just a short interjection, Koenraad, that would be. I think Koenraad has done it. So let me ask Shankar Sharanji to just translate what Koenraad has already said on this.
I think let him speak first.
Okay.
World supports Islam. Well, the real question is, why do the media support Islam? You see, in my country, for example, I wouldn't say ordinary people support Islam. They've had enough of Islam. And I mean, we've had our terrorist attacks and so on. So we really don't like Islam. But the media keep on dishing out pro-Islamic propaganda. And so the same thing in America and everywhere. Now, why is that? One reason is something old. A large part of these media are so-called free thinkers which means non-Christians. And so they have an old quarrel with the church, and they take in all allies they can get, including Islam. That predisposed them towards a positive view of Islam. Then the fact that, of course, the Muslims who came first were poor people. You know, they were working in the coal mines and so on. That's long ago now, but that's initially how it started. So again, you see, on that ground, on social grounds, they evoked our sympathy, and the difference between Muslims and Islam was never made. This first generation was hardly Muslim. They had Muslim names, okay. They went to the mosque as soon as it was there. But I mean, they were very superficially Islamized. And but nevertheless, you see, for the press, they say, "Oh, this is Islam. Is there anything wrong with it? You know, people going to their mosque. What's wrong with it?" Then finally, there are the enemies of Islam, and so the media don't like those. There are nationalists and so on. There are people who, for various reasons, oppose Islam. The media oppose them. So again, they join hands with Islam. And then finally, and this again is the doing of the media, it's also disinformation. You see, all the news in the world about the Rohingyas always depict the Rohingyas as poor, helpless victims of these overbearing, vicious Buddhists. And nothing is told about the whole prehistory. You see, in 1942, the Rohingyas were given arms by the British to fight the Japanese. Instead, they used them to fight their Buddhist neighbors, and so on and so on. I mean, there has been a whole terror history of the Rohingyas, and finally, the Buddhists were fed up. Okay, but so that preceding part is always left out. In the case of India, the same, and in fact, you can see it in your own secularist papers in India. Whenever a Hindu hurts a Muslim, it's big news, front page news. Whenever the reverse happens, it's much less highlighted, or the follow-up is not shown, or the identity of victim and perpetrator are blurred, so that you think that this is an intra-Hindu quarrel or an intra-Muslim quarrel, and so on. So you see, this happens on a worldwide scale. It's always this image of Muslims as victims, and so people with their natural sympathy for victims, for underdogs, tend to sympathize with Muslims, because you see, all the negative sides of Islam are systematically obscured.
Okay. Next. Mithilesh Kumar. Elite in India prefer to send their kids to missionary schools who promote Christian values. It will be better if government schools give better English education. शंकर शरण जी, ये बताइए आप.
मुझे तो ऐसा नहीं लगता कि इसमें कुछ चुनने के लिए है, बिकॉज इन एवरी सर्विसेज जो बेटर है वहाँ लोग जाते हैं. अगर मिशनरी स्कूल ज़्यादा क्वालिफाइड हैं, ज़्यादा रिसोर्सफुल हैं, तो वहाँ लोग जाते ही हैं. फिर एक उनके साथ एक प्रेस्टीज जुड़ी हुई है पुराने समय से, और गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स अपनी क्षमता के हिसाब से कमज़ोर साबित हुए हैं. वहाँ की व्यवस्था खराब है, अनुशासन खराब है. तो जो समाज का तो चलन है कि जहाँ बड़े लोग जाते हैं वहीं आम लोग भी जाते हैं. तो जब एलिट्स प्रेफर करते हैं तो आम लोग भी वो प्रेफर करते हैं. और जब इंग्लिश ही पढ़ना है, इंग्लिश एजुकेशन ही पढ़ना है, तो जो ओरिजिनल इंग्लिश पढ़ा सकते हैं, जो मिशनरीज हैं जिनके अभी भी विदेशों से लिंक जुड़े हुए हैं, तो लोग मान के चलते हैं कि उनकी बेहतर होगी, तो इसलिए वहाँ जाते हैं. लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि सबसे बड़ी बात वही है जो कोनराड ने भी अभी थोड़ी देर पहले ध्यान दिलाया, और गोयल जी की इस किताब में भी आखिर में है, कि अगर हम अपने देश के बारे में, अपने बृहद इतिहास के बारे में, संस्कृति के बारे में सचेत नहीं होंगे, तो ये सब जो है उसके छोटे से हिस्से हैं। इसको बदला ही नहीं जा सकता है कि जब तक हम अपने देश के बारे में, अपने इतिहास के बारे में, अपनी संस्कृति के बारे में सचेत ना हो। जब हम सचेत होंगे तो अपने आप हमारा ध्यान संस्कृत जानने पर और अपनी अपनी भाषा और अपने महान साहित्य को जानने पर होगा। जब वो है ही नहीं और अंग्रेजी ही पढ़नी है, तो जो सबसे अच्छी जगह है वहाँ लोग जाना चाहते हैं। तो जो ये पुराने ब्रिटिश टाइम के स्थापित स्कूल हैं या पुराने मिशनरियों के स्थापित स्कूल हैं या आज भी जो उनके द्वारा संचालित स्कूल हैं, वहाँ ऑटोमेटिकली लोग वो जाते हैं क्योंकि उनको अपने देश, अपने समाज, अपने धर्म, अपनी संस्कृति, अपने इतिहास के प्रति वो चेतना नहीं बच गई है। और इसीलिए मैं वो जो पिछला सवाल था उसमें मैं संक्षेप में एक लाइन जोड़ना चाहता हूँ कि ये सारा जो इस्लाम के प्रति भी जो उनमें एक लूज रुख है, सपोर्टिंग रुख है, उसके पीछे मुख्य कारण अज्ञान है। वो न इस्लाम के बारे में जानते हैं, न अपने बारे में जानते हैं। और ये पहले नहीं था, 100 साल के अंदर ये ज़्यादा बुरी हाल हुई है। तो जब हम इस्लाम के बारे में, अपने धर्म के शत्रु के बारे में नहीं जानते और अपने धर्म की विशेषता को भी नहीं जानते, तो स्वाभाविक है कि हम अपनी शिक्षा के प्रति वो एक क्या बाजारू भाव रखेंगे, एक सिर्फ इकोनॉमिक भाव रखेंगे। तो ऐसी स्थिति में इसको बदलना बहुत मुश्किल है, खास करके जब हमारे नीति निर्माता भी जब वो नीतियाँ बनाते हैं, जब वो अपने बयान देते हैं या जब प्लान करते हैं शिक्षा की, तो उसमें इन सब बातों का कहीं उल्लेख भी नहीं होता। तो आम लोग या एलीट लोग, उनमें ज़्यादा अंतर इस मामले में नहीं है, ऐसा मुझे लगता है।
जी, नेक्स्ट। Shankadeep Ghosh, how can Hindus stop Islamization of J&K and Hindu ethnic atrocities in J&K if present appeasement continue? Well, J&K is a separate subject, a specialized subject by itself. I think I would let that pass because for J&K, we will hold a separate session. In fact, there was one today, and there would be one coming up again on Saturday with Dr. Ajay Chungu. So I would suggest, I think we can retain this question for that particular session. Or if you like, you can ask it again. Parmanu ID, instance of common people resistance against Islam, not rulers. Common people resistance, not rulers. Yeah, Koenraad.
Yeah, well, I am not very at home among, the common people and in commoners' neighborhoods, but I do read that many so-called Hindu-Muslim riots are in fact Dalit Muslim riots, and that the attacks on any sign of non-Muslim religious life is very often directed at Dalits. And among those people, you do have a strong fighting spirit, and which you don't find among, the Hindu intellectuals in the cities. But so I can't give many details about that. But I do notice that there still you find that Hindu fighting spirit. So the weak Hindu may have become true, has not always been true, may have become true in the cities to some extent. In the countryside, I think Hindus are still very alive and combative.
Next. Sushil, how were the lessons of battles of Rajasthan forgotten, leading to the destruction after Tarayan II? Were the Turkic descendants more cunning than the Arabs against Bappa Rawal's coalition? To all. Good question, Sushil. We'll gift you the book. Koenraad.
Let's say that the Arabs certainly tried very hard and failed for a long time. You see, the book is called 636 to 1206. 1206 is when the Delhi Sultanate started, when the Muslims really had a durable state, which lasted for some 300 years, and which covered a sizable part of India. 636 is the very first invasion of India, a naval invasion on the coast, which was quickly repelled. And so between 636 and 712, there have been many invasions, and they all failed. And so the Caliphate of Damascus really, was worried after a while, because these damn Hindus, they killed so many Muslims. But finally, the young General Mohammed bin Qasim, he thought of earning his spurs by finally doing it right, and he did. And so he did invade India, but you see, at that time he was faced with real Indians, with real Hindus, and that lasted over the whole period covered here. By the time of the Mughal Empire, starting in 1526, you get many more cases of Hindus collaborating. And even of Hindus thinking that somehow it's part of political power to be Islamic. Like, for instance, the court language in many courts, even non-Muslim courts, becomes Persian, because somehow they think that a court language has to be Persian. You know, this is not a very deep thing. This is just human inertia. You know, if I may make a funny comparison, it's like with anthems. The British anthem was the very first, not the oldest song, but the very first that served as anthem. And so when in the time of the French Revolution, which was the high point of nationalism, all the nations started to devise an anthem of their own, many thought that it was just natural for an anthem to be to the tune of God Save the Queen. And so you had a Russian anthem set to God Save the Queen. You had a German anthem set to God Save the Queen. Heil dir im Siegerkranz, Herrscher des Vaterlands. Heil Kaiser dir. In Austria, they made a tune of their own, but set to a translation of the English text, and so on. So there was no particular reason for doing that. That was just an inertial first reaction. Then later they started getting their national pride together and devising one of their own. But so here, you see, for example, that Shivaji, even when opposing Muslim rule, speaks of Hindu Padishahi. The word Hindu, of course, is already a Persian word, but Padishahi is the rule by the Padishah. The Padishah is the title of the Mughal emperor, in which you can recognize the word Shah, meaning king. So that Muslim influence went quite deep over the centuries. And so initially you had pure Hindus giving Muslim invaders a fight. Later on, you had more and more collaborators. And so that's a fact. You know, that's one thing you have to take into account. That's what happened in Indian history. I don't know if it had to do with the ethnic difference between Arabs and Turks. Maybe you see the Turks are just geographically better located. If you invade India not from Sindh, from the sea, but from Afghanistan, you are immediately in the heartland. So maybe it's nothing deeper than that. It's a good question to be studied. You see, I do not have the final answer. It's an important question. But so what I do deduce from it is that there is a certain change of mentality on the Hindu side over the centuries. You see, they get benumbed by the seemingly everlasting Muslim domination, which makes it all the more spectacular that Shivaji turned the tide completely. that they really dethroned Muslim rule in very many parts of India.
Next. Ashish Duhan, history book write only about Jat Gujar resistance. Do Dalit also fight them, or they have both ways fight with Islam and Brahmanical? No, Ashish, I think you misunderstood that. The question was about common men's resistance. So that Dalit resistance answer was in that context. Whether only the rulers had fought them or also the common men had fought them. On the common men front, that was the answer that, okay, the Dalits had fought the Muslims in common streets, for that matter. Rakeshwari, Dr. Elst, why are the non-Christian free thinkers in Western media against the Hindus?
Well, one reason is that some simply have something against religion in general, and they don't know anything about Hinduism, but they just vaguely assume that whatever they have against Christianity will also count for Hinduism. Then, secondly, it is because they hear a lot about a Hindu Muslim conflict, where already they have decided to side with Islam. So, and then thirdly is, of course, the enormous misinformation that the secularists spread. So you have to see that the information about India comes through a bottleneck controlled by the secularists. And so, again, the BJP is not doing anything about this, and nobody else seems powerful enough to do anything about it. Like, for instance, the recent news about the coronavirus and the way it was treated by Narendra Modi. Now, I can testify when in February last year I left India, on the airport already everything was geared to controlling corona, of which I didn't know anything yet. I've even come back in March, you see, not knowing how serious it had become. And so, and then I had to leave quickly because clearly the borders were being closed and everything. And so, um, Narendra Modi was very, very aware of the corona threat. You see, in the international media, they compare him with Trump, who was hesitant, although he did have the virus made. Sorry, he did have the vaccination made. Okay, or with even with Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, who just simply denied the whole corona threat, with many victims as a result. Now, you see, that is not the case with Narendra Modi at all. You see, like most world rulers, he did what he could. And initially, it was quite successful. And so by February of this year, you see, Indians more or less heaved a sigh of relief, oh, it's over. But you see, this virus is a difficult thing. Like Taiwan and Vietnam did not have the virus, did not have a problem. So wow, everybody was admiring them. But finally, early this year, they also were hit. And so all kinds of things happened. In Britain, Boris Johnson goofed up in the beginning. Then he decided to vaccinate everyone, very successful. Yet now the so-called Indian variety, the Delta variety, has broken out and is again worsening the problem. And so all kinds of things can happen that a government cannot control. In India, moreover, the situation is that there's a division of competence between the central government and the states. Health is a state um, competence. So, to a large extent, it's not Modi you have to blame. Anyway, Modi did what he could, and so apparently the worst is again over. So he is not entirely unsuccessful. But you see, in the world all over, you see this Corona crisis was used as finally a Modi's failure. You see, they couldn't deny his economic successes and so on, but and his sanitation work and all that. But this, of course, they really pounced upon. So yeah, you see, with this kind of disinformation, many innocent people, many people who basically have nothing against India, are turned against Hinduism. Yes.
Okay. I think that brings this discussion to a close. Let me make an announcement. This is the 7th episode and the 8th episode of the Sitaram Goel Centenary Series will be the last episode of the series, and that will be Muslim imperialism in India. I think probably one of the more important and more famous books written by Sitaram Goelji. And we will end this series with that book. And with that, we thank everyone. We thank Koenraad, we thank Shankar Sharanji, and we thank all the viewers. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
वंदे मातरम।